Namaste, everyone. I think this is not designed for very tall people. Can everyone hear me? I'm fine? Yeah. So, just to give you some background, I'm going to be speaking not about the book itself. Maybe if there's some time, I will give a little bit of, I might do a reading from the novel itself. But the novel itself is a work of fiction. Today, I'm going to speak a little about life in South Africa, how we grew up, how the past generations grew up, and give you a feeling that might, sort of give you a general idea of what life in South Africa is when you're Indian. I think before I start proper, I must just say it's so wonderful to hear or to see a function start off with a silent meditation and end it off with Om. I've never experienced that in an academic environment. But of course, I come from a Western style university background. So this is fantastic for me. Being not just as a Hindu, but as an Indian, I truly appreciate it. So I'm going to be discussing about these. So when I say lost civilization, it's in inverted commas. I deliberately put it in inverted commas, and this is a bit of a pet grouse of mine. That when we speak about the Indians who went to indentured countries, the Indians in India don't really know of them. People really in India only know of South Africa because of the cricket. We have a very good cricket team. But when I speak about South Africa, they get a bit confused and they start picturing lions running around and you're staying in huts and I'm not saying you guys are like that because you come from an educated background. Other senses, if you come to South Africa, it's very much like what Dubai was maybe 20 years ago. I mean, Dubai is now full of skyscrapers and so forth, so it has changed dramatically. Indian flag and the South African flag. A bit of background on me. I'm an engineer, an economist, and essayist. And I don't use any of my qualifications. Now I'm now an entrepreneur, and you can see I like English, so I used an alliteration, meaning all the E's. So I stuck to my literary roots on terms of this. So, firstly, I'm just going to start off with some disclaimers. I think Lipika went through my presentation. She said, "Aman, basically, you." She didn't say so directly, but she said you got to tone it down. Now, I'm used to going to universities where you can speak anyhow and you can probably swear, and it's because it's supposed to be a liberal environment, you can get away with it. But now, sensing the tone of the university, and I mean this in the most respectful way. So, back to my disclaimers, I'm known for putting my foot in my mouth when I speak. I don't hold back, and I get into a lot of trouble for that. I speak with brutal honesty, and not many people appreciate brutal honesty. I don't tend to couch it in terms of softening the blow of what I say, and that's made me quite an unpopular person in my own country. But I always say, writers are not politicians. We're not here to win votes. We're here to speak the truth. This might not be necessary. I don't think I'm that hard hitting, but if you find anything offensive, you guys are university kids or university lecturers, so there should be a spirit of inquiry about you, so please don't get offended by what I have to say. So, why am I saying this? And I've hinted it towards it already, and it goes back to who we are and the community I represent. So, first of all, let me say, and this comes from maybe my own insecurity, we're not the posh Indians of England who went there probably a generation or two ago. We're not the loud Indians of the USA. Those of you who meet Americans, they're very loud and they're very nasal, and maybe they're not ill mannered, but that's just the way of the tone of speaking. We're not the doctor Indians of Canada. If you go to Canada, most Indians are doctors, but I think I'm exaggerating there. We do have a number of doctors and engineers as well in South Africa. It seems to be the favorite vocation for most Indian people. And then we're not the new Indians of Australia. So a lot of Indians are now going to Australia and New Zealand. So basically, there's this whole, in the last generation, in keeping up with the Joneses, a lot of people tend to want to move to the West. And, kudos to them because it's not easy to make it in a foreign environment. But personally, where I come from, I believe you should be building the country that you are born in. That is what you should be doing. So we are none of these people, and that's what all the crosses mean here. So sorry about this, but I think you guys can handle it. Nobody loved kissing the you know what of the West as much as Generation X of India did, because, like I said, there was this huge influx of Indians into America when it came to Generation X. So you can figure out the math on that. And of course, Pardes, those of you who are around my age, people still say, I love my India, but the fact is, a lot of them don't actually show it in the way that I would like to see it. I am probably third or fourth generation Indian, but I sometimes feel I have more love for India than a lot of the people who I've met from India itself. So the focus today, I will be speaking about a so-called lost generation of Indians. And when I say a lost generation of Indians, they were guys who were people who were kidnapped or they were duped or they were brought out of India by the British Raj. Now, my ego is big, so I'm going to be speaking about the history of the Indians in South Africa. But in order for me to explain it, I have to speak about my own experiences. So I'll be bringing in my own life and my own family life into the whole presentation. So, if I could call myself a horse, because I'm third and fourth generation, you're getting it straight from the horse's mouth. So, who am I? First of all, I told you who I am from my career point of view. This is a passion of mine. I have written my novel called A Dalliance with Destiny. It's, I think maybe let me ask some of you a question. Does anyone know what this represents, this lady with the hair becoming a river? I mean, it's quite obvious to me. Can anyone venture an answer here? I'm a bit concerned if you can't figure out who that is supposed to represent. Okay, that represents Mother Ganga, right? The hair is becoming the river, Gangotri. Yeah. So this is about a young man. When I say a young man, he's about 32 years old, and South Africa has basically gone into a new dispensation. It's post-apartheid, and everyone's euphoric. Wow, we have now joined the rest of the world. Apartheid has died. But he's not feeling like that. He's feeling dislocated. He's feeling lost. And he's trying to figure out, what am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? Do I belong? Which is the general issue that you face with most dislocated people. And he gets these nudges and sort of pushes from externally. Maybe it's the universe, maybe he's just making up things in his head. But he gets these nudges that he needs to go to India to find some sort of solution or some sort of absolution to his life. And he does. He goes from city to city looking for a guru, he's looking for love, he's looking for a sense of belonging. And eventually he goes to the source of the Ganga, sorry, the mouth of the Ganga in Sagar Island near Calcutta. And he starts traveling up the Ganges towards the source, which is in Gaumukh. It used to be in Gangotri, but now it's in Gaumukh because of global warming. And as he's going through UP, he stops at his various ancestral villages trying to find long lost relatives. So I've said who we are not. We are not the Americans, we're not the Australians, we're not the Canadians, and we're not from New Zealand. We are the descendants of the Girmityas, or what we call Jahaji Bais. I'll explain what this means. So we came from these indentured countries. It's Fiji, which is on the extreme east, Mauritius, Natal, which is South Africa. I come from there. And then there's Suriname, there's British Guyana, which is now just called Guyana, there's Trinidad, and then there's Jamaica. And so this is where all the indentured laborers went under the British Raj. Just to give you an idea in terms of the numbers, the biggest contingent went to Mauritius around about 1838. It was just under 500,000. The next highest went to British Guyana, and then Natal took about 152,000. The strange thing is, I think in Mauritius, the population density of Indians is still about 1.2 million. So it's only increased or doubled. South Africa, on the other hand, it went from 152,000 to about 1.5 million. So I can't understand. Maybe we're a more fertile lot that went to South Africa, but we definitely grew in terms of the population. So why did it happen? And I think this is the crux of the issue. Slavery was abolished in 1833. The British Empire was huge. They say that the sun never set on the British Empire. And a lot of the colonies were agriculture-based countries. So slavery was basically went through its own cancel culture. So there was no source of cheap labor anymore. So how do you make the farms in these colonies productive, but at the same time, you manage to keep it, you manage to get a cheap form of labor? So the solution was to create what we call an agreement form based of labor. So being Indian and being from the villages, they couldn't say agreement. So they called it girmit instead of agreement. So they basically became girmityas. So one of the terms used by the whites to refer to us, it was a derogatory term. In fact, in South Africa, it's banned. We were referred to as coolies. Now, in India, coolie, I think, is a porter. But in South Africa, it's a very derogatory term. It's not, it's banned. You can get charged for using the term. Just to give you an idea, not all of them went by choice. Like I mentioned earlier, people had sacks thrown over them, and some of them were kidnapped. They had families separated. Remember, they were from the villages of UP and Bihar, and also from the south of India. They were also they were basically stolen. You know, it's a worse form of kidnapping, and it's abduction. Um, you know, if you look at them and you look at me, I know I don't look as sad and as malnourished as them, but trust me, this is what happened to our forefathers. And they were made to parade at, if you came from the northern states, you were made to parade in Calcutta from the river port where they left and hold these, what we call colonial numbers. See, they're holding numbers in front of them, which is something that has helped me to manage to trace my roots. So basically, they were escaping the hardships of India during the British Raj, but they didn't realize it was many, many times worse in South Africa. Some of them were lied to that the roads of South Africa are paved with gold, and they believed it. They thought they're going to go there and they're going to get rich overnight. But it wasn't true. And what we found was basically slavery and indenture were flip sides of the same coin. So I'm going to link my own family tree to indenture in defining myself. So that's not legible. Now, I want to make it clear I'm not caste conscious. Caste was practiced in South Africa right up to the 1990s, but only in terms of marriage. Thereafter, I think we got about 1.5 million Indians. If you had any more people marrying within the same caste, you're going to have a problem with interbreeding and the kind of physical deformities that come with inbreeding. So on my father's side, they were all UPI Brahmins, all came as Pandits. So I traced them back 10 generations, and I found that they were all Pandits. On my mother's side, which sort of comes from the right half, the surname was Singh, and they all came from UP, I think 25% Bihari as well. But they had to marry within their own caste. And strangely, right up to my mother's generation, if you didn't marry within your own caste, you were kicked out of the family, which sounds strange, for a foreign country to be doing that, but that's exactly how it was. And right up to 1990, not only did you, if you were a Brahmin, you had to marry not only within your own caste, you had to marry within the same region in India that you came from. So if you're a UPI Brahmin, you had to marry a UPI Brahmin. That's how strange it was. So people, and it happened in my own family where girls, if they married out of the caste, they were basically crossed out. They were not accepted. They were kicked out of the family. So that was the kind of cancel culture that we faced right up to the 90s. So what catalyzed my research? Now, I wish I could say it was something, romantic, but the truth is it wasn't romantic. I wanted my OCI. Um, India, South Africa is basically, it was a very first world country. It still is a first world country, but it's going down. And maybe that's due to the fact that there's a lot of inept people that are running the country itself. So our infrastructure services are slowly but surely devolving. When I came to India first in 1981, long before some of you were born, India had lots of electricity outages in those days. Water was a big issue. Now you come to South Africa, we have something called load shedding, where at one stage ESCOM, which is the supplier of electricity in South Africa, was the cheapest in the world. Now it's not functional because there's so much of corruption. People are stealing the coal and they're going for contracts. So there's a lot of government contracts. It's a government-owned entity that has turned state-owned enterprises basically into basket cases. So it was about me getting my OCI. That's where I started doing my research. I've always been a huge lover of India. And I say this in inverted commas. I don't mean like I'm this person who just loves Bollywood. I mean, that doesn't mean you love India. It's not representative of what India is. I've studied a hell of a lot of what India is all about. This is my 18th trip to India. I've been the length and breadth of India, except I think the northeastern states. I have like the names are not coming, Meghalaya and so forth. I haven't been to those areas. In fact, not only am I a strong Indian, I am a strong Hindu as well. If you have to cut my veins, you'll probably see saffron blood flowing from it. So I'm not ashamed to say it. I'm a very strong and I'm a practicing Hindu. I don't just say it for the name or sake of saying it itself. So you'll remember we. Going back to what else pushed me, this is I'm in the picture wearing a red sort of you call it a sash or a shawl or whatever it is. I'm playing the role of a Gora. It's my Nana's 80th birthday, and my Nana was born in India. He left there as a 3-year-old. So maybe because I was a little bit fairer, they made me play the role of the bad Gora, and I had to. And they were working on a sugarcane farm, and I had to play the part of somebody who basically starts slapping the person who played my Nani's mother. That was my role in that. So all this subconsciously, it gives you a kind of feel for your culture and wanting to know your roots. It's implanted in you. You may not realize it back then, but it is there. And that's the fantastic thing about subliminal memory. It's in there, you just need to tap into it. So I began to close the ancestral circle. I decided to dig into my roots. So remember you had those pictures of those guys holding those cards with those numbers. These are the shipping lists. The original, this is about 150 to 170 years old. So you can see the numbers on the extreme left. This is the actual 170-year-old book where they were. The one thing the British was very good at was administration. They kept records of everything. And so that was how I was able to go to the archives and find my forefathers. So you can see this is my great-grandfather, Gayadin Singh, my great-grandmother, my Parnani, Radharani, and this was my grandfather who came as a 3-year-old boy. So I just filmed a bit of it. We're not supposed to do this. It's actually illegal. So this is me doing something illegal here. But having said that we're doing something illegal, let me tell you something. Up to about 30 years ago, these books, these are valuable books, were lying on the floor and they were almost flooded because nobody took an interest in them. It took one wise Indian employee working for the archives department to see it, and he kicked up a fuss, and that's when they started to rebind the books. I think there's a term for it when you restore the books itself. So this is the actual ship, and I only found this picture out this year. There was a guy in Australia who has this. His grandfather was the captain of the ship, and he kept pictures from 1903. So in this ship, it's called the SS Amzinto, and it's the actual ship that my Nana came on, the actual voyage that he came with his parents. So somewhere in there is my Nana being carried by his parents. You can see they lived and they slept in absolute squalor. From India to the furthest, for example, British Guyana, which is the furthest place, it took 5 months. And can you believe people living like that for 5 months? Now, at that time, we're looking at from the 1838 onwards, caste was a very huge thing. So suddenly Brahmins had to sleep with, non-Brahmins and so forth. So in a sense, when you cross the Kala Pani, Brahmins lost their Brahmanhood and they were forced to eat, for example, meat. They were given meat to eat. I don't know if it was beef or what, but they were definitely given dry meat to eat. So it was something difficult to swallow. They were not told these things, and this is what happened when they went on the ships. Disease was very rife on board. if somebody became sick, there was hardly any medical care. Somebody died, no ceremony, they were thrown overboard. That was it. So it was very, very sad affair. Um, and, this is the worst part, and because British sailors who accompanied them on the voyage, like I said, going to Guyana was 5 months. Coming to Durban, I think at that time was 3 months. A lot of the single Indian women were raped on the ships. And, you know, what is the proof of that? 9 months later, a lot of the Indian women had blue eyed babies with blonde hair. And how do you explain it? But there were some good things as well. This is where the term Jahaji Bais came about. I still am in touch with my grandfather's friends that they made on the ship. And those were called Jahaji Bais, or brothers of the ship. So they were not blood related, but they were regarded as family. This is the same voyage. This is the white people who came in that from India, the British Raj, and much better conditions. And this is my Paranana who came from India with two of his kids. This picture is taken around about 1920. He left India around about 1906. And thus began my journey. So I decided to trace my roots. So the first thing I did was I went to my father's side village. Now, just to give you an idea how difficult it is, those of you who are from UP, my father came from my great grandfather came from a village called Kura Tiwarika Purva. So when the British kept records, they translated it like how they heard it. So in Hindi, when I eventually found out the right village, it was Kud Tiwaripur. But the British spelled it in the records like that. So I went all over, but I was looking for in the district of Handia, which is in Allahabad or Prayagraj. I was looking for any village that had a name with Tiwari in it. Now the problem in UP is you go to any village that has a family called Tiwari living there. It's called Tiwaripur. So how do you find it? So eventually I went to about in that day I went to about 6 villages. The last village I went to was called Pure Tiwari. And as I went there, I saw the Ganges literally flows alongside it. And then I remembered what my father had told me from his grandfather, that Ganga Kinare. I remembered that. And then I knew this was the village because it was the only one that had the Ganga flowing alongside it. That's how I knew the banks of the Ganga, and this was my village. And so that's the head man there. And he corroborated the story because he told me that the village was once one village called Kurtiwaripur, but a flood caused them to separate. So next door was Kurtpur, and this village was called Tiwaripur, and that it became Pure Tiwari in time. This is a picture of myself with some of the village kids, and there's probably my nieces and nephews, maybe 3 times removed. I did the same with my maternal roots. 2019, after a tragedy of my mum passing away, I wanted to take her ashes to India. And I took some of my family, including my mama and his wife, my brother, and the kids, and we went and put a memorial plaque. You can see on the top of the entrance wall. And so we were the first group that went there after 1906. So they treated us fantastically. And the best part was, I eventually found the actual property where my Nana was born. And everything had caved in. The roof had caved in. There was only one wall standing. And the strange part, maybe call it divine intervention, the wall that was standing is the prayer wall. You can see it's the prayer wall. I mean, of all things, just the prayer wall survived for 120 odd years. And that made me I was a very emotional, I'm not showing there, but it was a very emotional moment for me. So I took a decision there and then, if they allowed me, I'm going to convert that property into a library cum clinic for the villagers, and it's going to be solar powered. So COVID delayed us for about 2 or 3 years, but we're still going ahead with it. So back to who we are, just to give you the South African context back then, this is the province of Natal. South Indians who came to as Girmityas, they basically came from Andhra Pradesh, and I think Andhra Pradesh was split into Telangana. Thank you. And they also came from Tamil Nadu, and they left via Madras or Chennai, as it's known now. Maybe some of you know it, or maybe some of you don't, but that entire South Indian region was called the Madras Presidency back in the day. Then some of us, my forefathers came from UP, and 25% I am Bihar. Bihar was split into Bihar and Jharkhand, but that Bihar, when they left, was not called Bihar, it was part of Bengal. It was called Bengal Presidency. UP at that time, when my forefathers left, was not called Uttar Pradesh, it was called United Provinces of Agra and Oudh. Oudh comes from, I didn't know this, was a shortened form of Ayodhya. So it was a cantonment area named by the British. Um, just to give you an idea, the people that left were of all castes, but they were all poor and urban, and sorry, rural. If you look at Gujarat, the Gujaratis followed maybe a generation later. They came as small scale businessmen. They saw the opportunity. They were not doing well under the British Raj, so they followed as what we call passenger Indians. So they paid for their trip to come to South Africa. Um, Nowadays, we, this whole thing about caste died in the 1990s. I came from a very caste conscious family. My father's side were Pandits, and they married only within their own sort of caste. I come as Maharaj, but my actual surname is Dubey, which I only found out about 5 or 6 years back. Because when you landed in Natal or South Africa, the interpreter would see you wearing a Genoa string. So he'll say, Wo Maharaj hai, meaning he's a Pandit. So the translator will just write Maharaj. So that's how the surname Maharaj came about. And you'll only see that surname in the indentured countries like Trinidad and so on, South Africa. Um, so the caste system died out. And then round about the 1990s, people started marrying across the linguistic groups as well. So, people from Tamil Nadu would marry someone from Uttar Pradesh and so forth. But what we don't really have in a hurry is cross religious marriages. So you won't have a Hindu marrying a Muslim. It does happen, but not often. So the British took us to do what? They took them to cut sugarcane. And this is what it represents. This is how life was. And it was a very difficult time. At the port, sadly, some families were separated, and women also they had very, very difficult. It was 18-hour work days, and it was back-breaking labor. And the truth is, some of the white sugarcane barons, they developed a taste for brown flesh. So when their wives were out of town or visiting the city, a lot of these women were raped. And I said, what is the proof of that? Blonde hair and blue-eyed babies that were born 9 months later. And the fathers simply had to accept it. And there's a terrible story of a farmer called North Dean, which is now a suburb of Durban. He made it a rule that every Indian girl who was a daughter of the indentured laborer who was getting married on the farm, and pardon me for saying this, but his rule was that he had to deflower her the one night before the wedding itself. That was his quirk, if I can call it that, which is what, the kind of nonsense, if I can use a soft term like that, that we had to endure. There were large scale conversion attempts. To this day, I still get people contacting me and saying, have I been saved? And I like dumb, basically saying, have you found Jesus? And I'll say, I am saved. And they'll say, oh, when did you find Jesus? I'll say, no, I found Krishna. I was born with Krishna within me. And they get very upset. But I can become very flippant. When it comes to me and my strength in Hinduism, I don't take any nonsense. I live my talk. I don't just say I am a Hindu, is what a lot of people say. I live it, I practice it, which I'll show just now. These guys had a very difficult time. Their wages was a pittance. And what was even more difficult was, whilst they were, say for example, somebody got sick, and it was a 31-day month. So if you got sick for 10 days, you had to pay the farmer back twice the amount you earned for every day. So in the end, if you didn't work for 10 days, you had to pay the farmer for that month for the 20 days that you worked. So you can imagine how ridiculous it was that you had to end up paying someone that you didn't work, that you worked for. The rations were pitiful. They didn't respect the religious customs of people. They had to go to court and fight it out, and they lost it a couple of times until eventually it came through. There were no schools, no community halls, no places of worship were provided by the government, no healthcare facilities, child labor, and the worst part was suicide rate was very high. And I discovered that my Parnana had actually hung himself, and people, the older generation in the family knew about it, but because it's an embarrassment, nobody talks about suicide. But I was digging in the archives and I found the death certificate, and it said the death by hanging from a tree. So when I asked my mother, I think she almost smacked me. Why am I talking about it? It's hush hush. But that shows you how difficult times were back then. So this is an interesting song. Let me just tell you, this is about a Girmitya who returned to India. And it's a very sad, it's about a minute. Just listen to it and tell me, I don't know if it has sound. Does it have sound? Can you put the sound on? Does it have sound? Okay. No, it's a slide show, so it won't. It's not working. Yeah, I think we're coming close. Yeah, carry on. Yeah, right. Thank you. It's working. So that was the lament of a Grimitya, and it was a terrible life. And a lot of them tried to go back to India. But the problem is, if you were a Brahmin, you were not accepted because you basically lost your caste the moment you went across the Kalapani. So there was successes as well, and let me speak about the successes. So within, one generation, in each farm, they started to build temples, they started to build masjids, and if you're a Christian, they decided to build churches. This is one of the first schools in 1902, but schools were already starting to be built in around about 1870, remembering that the first Indian went to South Africa in 1860. Within 10 or 12 years, they started to build schools on the same pittance of money that they were given. Clinics started to be built, but the first clinic started in 1900, but I couldn't get pictures of that. This lady is the first Indian doctor, probably I think the first Indian female doctor who studied in Edinburgh. She died about sometime this uh, decade. Her name is Kesavalu Gunam, and she became a doctor in Edinburgh. I think within a generation, the children of Girmityas became teachers, doctors, lawyers, And within 2 or 3 generations, they started to become engineers as well, as that started to be offered. So what I'm trying to say is, despite all the hardships, and this is not just true for Indian South Africans, it's true for Indians throughout the world. Somehow, some way, we make a success of ourselves, and it's not necessarily easily accepted by other races. There is jealousy that does happen, which I'm going to talk about just now. I think in those days, the Indians were a lot more united because, the Hindus would celebrate Muharram with the Muslims. The Muslims would celebrate Diwali with the Hindus, but it doesn't happen anymore, which is actually, to me, a sad state of affairs that we're not as integrated as we used to be. So, what traditions did we retain? So, let's talk about food. Even though 170 years have passed, I personally still eat curry probably 4 times a week. I eat it with roti and I eat it with my hands. Now, this is an interesting thing. It's called a bani chow. So what happened is a lot of the Gujaratis used to own the cafes where they used to give food to the workers that were working in the cities. So because of apartheid, a black or an African man couldn't enter an Indian restaurant. So there was a hatch in the wall, and to make it as cheap as possible, they would take a loaf of bread, cut it in two, and they would scoop out the inner soft part and they'll fill the curry into it. And then they'll take that same scoop and smash it in. So that's what you're seeing there. So it was called a bani chow. Bani chow because I think bani is a corruption of the word vanya. Gujaratis were vanyas. So that's where the word banya, the vanya became banya, and the word bani chow. Chow is a slang where you speak about food. So that's how the term came about. But this is typically what we eat. Not the bread, but the curries. I eat curries, like I said, 4 times a week. Um, you saw the ships that they came on. Now, these are all the Indian vegetables: bindi, karela, methi, loki. I don't know what's the terms that you use in the different linguistic groups, but I call it loki, or I think it's calabash. Those same guys who came on those ships in 1860, they had the foresight to carry the seeds for these vegetables so that 120 years later, we still get to eat food like this. Can you believe it? Otherwise, what kind of vegetarian food? We'd be eating root vegetables. So that was the amazing part that they had that kind of foresight. And, we as Indians nowadays in South Africa, we are so soft compared to what our forefathers were. And like I said, most Indians still eat with their hands. I eat with my hands, but I notice there are some Indians who will eat roti with a fork and knife, and I can't figure it out. How do you eat roti with a fork and knife? But it is what it is. Um, Still talking about food, I love my food. I don't think I've eaten a tastier biryani, a veg biryani, than you would get in South Africa. I still think I've been all over India, but the vegetarian biryani is still the best the way it's made in South Africa. We used to be very male focused in terms of the traditional families in South Africa. That's my Nana and his kids, 6 sons and 4 daughters. They had huge families because it was a sign of success. My Dada and Dadi, they had 17 children. He was known as Pandit Dwarika Maharaj. He had 10 sons who are listed there and 7 daughters. So it was very male centric. Daughters were sort of, I would say, not, they were ancillary to the whole process compared to, because having male sons was still a very sort of sign of power. The Pandit lineage on my Dada's side, I managed to trace it back 10 generations. On my mother's side, I managed to go back to the 11th century. There is a fort that has been built by the clan that we came from. So it's in Tikamgarh. If you know UP well enough, the whole Bundelkhand area, Jalan, Jhansi, and so forth, it spilled over into Madhya Pradesh. So in Tikamgarh, which was part of the Bundelkhand, there's a fort there that's built by my forefathers as well. So dialects survived about 170 years, but it is now dying out with the death of what we call the baby boomers. Baby boomers was the generation before me, the early 1960s and 1950s. They were the ones who spoke Hindi and Tamil, Telugu, Gujarati, my generation, I can understand it, but it takes me a while to interpret it. So what I'm going to do is show you something very interesting here. I'm showing you the dialect of Bhojpuri that is spoken in each indenture country. Personally, I don't like the sound of it. It sounds terrible. It sounds very guttural. Compared to Hindi, Hindi is very sweet. The Bhojpuri that they're speaking just now, you be the judge and tell me what you think. Starting off with Suriname Bhojpuri. Trinidadian Bhojpuri.
She then has to clean off the mud before preparing her produce to sell in the market.
Guyanese Bhojpuri.
हमारे सामने एक खास खास मेहमान हमारा हमारा प्यारी दादी जी नानी नानी तुम्हार पूरा नाम का बात सुनिंद्रा अच्छा और गयाना देश में कहाँ कहाँ जन्म है गयाना देश में
अरे भाई हमरा जाए के बला पेड़ पर अबे हमरा जाए के बला पेड़ पर हम जाए लापेड़ पर ना हम लापेड़ पर रह जाए तो कुछ दे गाड़ी हम चला गेली था जब रह गेली जाते बिहान में हम जाता हम अच्छा हम लोग कदी बार हम जाए लापेड़ पर हम ये नहीं जाती अरे चिंता का तक गान पर भाई संतन कबीर अरे चिंता का तक गान पर भाई संतन कबीर
This is South Africa. This is an action of the Ram Leela with men dressed as women. This is a relatively young girl.
You know, he's written, but you're still black, and then 3 laughing emojis. Oh my God, you sound like those aunties, like village में जब शादी वाली है तो जाएंगे मतलब देखेंगे दुल्हनिया कितना उज्जवल कितना गोर है फिर बात में बात कर ओह उसकी दुल्हनिया कितना कन्या लड़की शादी करने और कितना उज्जवल है कितना सुंदर लड़की
current generation speaks the same language?
It's wherever they are a majority. In what is Fiji, they are about half the population. In South Africa, we're only 2%. So it depends on how large the proportion of people are. So just rushing through the rest, this is me celebrating all my brother and my cousins doing Jano Sanskar when we were 18, and I think they're putting the Jano, our parents are behind us. But don't use my family as being indicative of what Indians in South Africa is. We come from a very traditional family. We had to, I think the UPI Brahmins, they have to pierce their ears when they're doing a Jano, so you can see the way it was being pierced there. Raksha Bandhan is still celebrated. This is my mother and her sisters tying for their brothers. Matkor, I don't know what Matkor means, but on the Hardi day, they do a Matkor. The woman, only the women are allowed to see, but we used to duck and take pictures. My brother on his Hardi day, it's only the woman who put Hardi on, but we playfully put the Hardi on to our brothers as well. Uh, on the day before the Hardi, the Puas or father sisters, they get together and they decorate the pot. And I'm not sure why it's done. Maybe you guys might have a better understanding, but it is done. So this whole thing is to show you that 170 years later, the traditions are still kept. Uh, on
Your, I mean, the Bharatias who would say moving outside if and living there for so long?
The only influence was in terms of the language. So, if you got a keen ear, when they were speaking the Bhojpuri, each dialect in each country was spoken differently. For example, South Africa will have a bit of Zulu in the Bhojpuri. So, but you got to pick it up and have, and to me, it sounded terrible. If you heard the guys doing that Ram Leela there, that I don't think we have any talent when it comes to singing. So it's only in the language and maybe in the food as well. A local food would be Indianized, it'd be turned into a curry, but they'll take like a local, for example, a potato that grows in the ground that's called a yam. I don't know if you have it here, will be turned into a curry. So that was the way we assimilated. So this is my mother and her sisters. They're making rot. They tend to get together. They grind their own masala, and there's a family recipe. So they're making rot on Raksha Bandhan. Not Raksha Bandhan. Hanuman Jayanti. This is me doing Pitarpak just finished. So this is a picture from me doing Pitarpak last year, and I have a janda where I do my prayers as well. So I'm quite. I'm not the traditional. I am the traditional India Hindu. This is interesting because the reason why I'm taking out this picture with the dog is when we used to stay in Indian areas under apartheid, it never used to be an issue that we would burst fireworks. But the moment apartheid ended and we started moving into the more affluent areas or the richer areas where the whites stayed, fireworks became an issue. And why was it an issue? No, because dogs can't handle the sound, there's too much of pollution. In fact, in the own gated estate where I stay, they tried to ban it, but I went and got a constitutional lawyer and I fought it. And in the constitution itself, it says that the right to culture has to be respected, no matter what it is. So I was able to change that around. So this is me just trying to irritate everyone. I'm taking a picture with me with fireworks and I'm holding my dog to say it can be done if you give them a sleeping tablet. Some traditions have died or changed. We never celebrated Holi because Holi, as you know, it happens during spring and we're in different hemispheres. But the whites and young blacks have started playing what they call the Festival of Color. So they play it at any time, but it comes from the tradition of Holi. This is a sad part. It doesn't happen in my family, but with this new generation, young kids are shacking up together from university days. They're staying together. And I think around about 2000, it became acceptable to the parents. At one stage, they were ducking and diving if they were still working in a different city, but that has changed now. This is one of the first old age homes called Aryan Benevolent Home. I'm probably one of the last extended families in South Africa. People tend to push their parents into old age homes. Obviously, it's a lot more modern, but to me, it's a very sad state of affairs. And this is something personal to me. People have stopped reading. If you're a reader, be very happy that in India, there's still a huge demand for reading. South Africa, with Netflix and Amazon Prime and so forth, we just don't have the desire. Divorce rate, I think it's quadrupled in this last generation. People are having bigger and bigger weddings, but the marriage itself is not lasting. And this is quite important. What has died? So the vernacular is no more known. Even if I speak Hindi, I sound very ridiculous when I'm speaking Hindi, although I do understand it. There was a time where we used to build temples. We don't do it anymore. We have to get people from India. We're not community focused anymore, and we don't have artistic talents. You heard those guys doing the Ram Leela. They sound terrible, but at least they did it. If you hear, I personally don't like listening to bhajans in South Africa if it's a South African Indian singing because they don't have sur. They haven't been learning how to sing under what you call it, a ustad or a pandit or whatever it is. So it just sounds terrible. We can't dance. There's no craftsmanship abilities. I watch Dance India dance and I see these 5-year-old kids dancing, and then we got grown-ups trying to dance and they just can't dance and they're taking part in programs. So maybe I'm being a bit too facetious about it. But there's hope. I introduced my nieces. I took them to Calcutta. This is the actual place where they left Calcutta. There's a monument there. And, to reach that point, that ghat in Calcutta, for example, the way they left from Geelong, they walked 1,200 kilometers to reach that point until the train was developed. And people say, why was the train developed? It was not done for India, it was done to move goods out of India, including people. Next generation, my family and us, we're doing the Hawan. That's our family pandit, but I do the Arya Samaj Hawan myself, teaching my nieces how to meditate. I try and instill Hindu values in them. And most important of all, if you have your dadi staying in the house, you'll make sure you do the Hawan. They teach you all Ramayana and Gita and so forth. So to summarize, why am I Indian and why am I Hindu? So it's something I've written down, which I just want to say through in a minute. I see myself as being, I see myself as being Indian because my roots are in India. I support the Indian cricket team. I listen to Mohammad Rafi, Mukesh, and Lata Mangeshkar songs every day. I'm a die-hard fan of Indian movies, and not just the Bollywood movies that come out now. I make sure I watch Mother India probably once a year. I love it. Like I said, I eat roti and curry once a week. I love a good biryani. I'm a huge fan of Indian nationalist politics and I'm a huge Narendra Modi fan. At the same time, a lot of leftist Hindus in South Africa are anti-Modi, which they're doing it without any thought of understanding what's, underpins his thinking. And, sadly, a lot of the Muslims don't support Narendra Modi. And I don't think it's based on actual facts. It's more on rumors. I stay in an extended family, probably the last of my kind in South Africa. I'm developing an ancestral village and, personally, I'm a mama's boy, like all Indian boys are. So probably if and when I get married, I'm sure my mother's food will still taste better than my wife's. And hopefully I will die in India. And I'm Hindu because I have traced my Hindu roots back to the 11th century. I light the lamp every day. I have a guru. My house is designed according to Vastu Shastra principles. So, for example, the prayer room is in the northeast and so forth. I have a Janda place, as you can see. My paternal ancestors can be traced back as Pandits for more than 10 generations. I will be cremated and not buried. I've been a vegetarian for 30 years. I do the Hawan every week. My maternal forefathers were founders of the Arya Samaj in South Africa. I meditate, I do yoga, and I shut up anyone who tries to convert me with a simple glare. So, and you get lots of people when they see me, they want to tell me about their religion if they're not Hindus. And whilst I respect the fact that, you are following your own religion, stay in your lane, don't jump into my lane. I'm very happy where I am. Some parting words. I'm boasting about South Africans. I think it's best said that no matter where we have gone as Desis, and no matter what the challenges, as Indians, we've made ourselves phenomenal successes throughout the world. But remember, in America, USA, and the UK, and Australia, they're first and second generation. South Africa, we go down 8 and 9 generations, and we've kept our sense of tradition. So if you have to have respect for anyone, think about us. Namaste. I think thank you for your time, and I hope it was something you found interesting. Thank you. Sorry, I was coughing. I'm happy to take any questions if there's time or.
Questions from the audience?
How do you respond to writing that's not do you find some can you empathize with his writing or you feel he's coming from very different perspective then?
I have the only book of Nepal. I'm glad you've mentioned Nepal. The only book of Nepal I've read is House for Mr. Biswas, which most readers have. And yes, we definitely identify. There's a lot of caste that's spoken about there, and the loss of identity. And one of the main things as Indians is probably in India as well. But in order to become a man, you have to have your own house. And a house for Mr. Biswas is all about him getting his own house. So yes, we identify totally. Yes, there's a bit of a difference in the language as I showed, when it comes to the local vernacular. But definitely, V.S. Naipaul himself, I've read his autobiography. He's a former, what you call a Hindu UPAT Brahmin, I think, but also very liberal. I think his final marriage, he ended up marrying a Muslim woman from Pakistan, I think. But yeah, he was very brutal. I think one of the things that he did say, which I don't have the guts to say, so I'm just quoting him. He said, when a white woman in England wanted to show their opposition to their parents, they would do what any naughty white girls would do. They'll go and, or naughty fat white girl would do. They would go marry a Zulu, meaning to show that they don't take instructions from their fathers. Now, I would never say, let's say something. It's a tad racist, but it shows you the kind of guy he was. He didn't mince his words.
But when you started writing, like, who were your inspiration? Then that he's coming from Indian diaspora.
Hi, my inspiration, if you do read my book, if it's something you do find interesting, or you write through to the end, I think my style of writing is the very old-fashioned kind of literature. So it goes back to those deep, sweeping novels, like your Charles Dickens, where they wrote at a time where the only form of entertainment was literature. So they wrote those sweeping books, and my book, it's fairly sweeping. It's over a period of 100 years, and it traces an entire four generations, which is typical of what you would find in Dickens or even Thomas Hardy. I mean, they've got that, and the emotions that run through these books. If you read a Thomas Hardy book, the way he wrote about people's emotions, I think a lot of that, my writing taps into that. I don't compare myself to them, but yes, in terms of yardsticks, I would use some of them. In terms of Indian writers, I love Kushwan Singh. He's a very naughty writer, especially for an old man, but his writing is very good. And I've become a racist reader myself. If I read a book, it has to be set in India. If it's not written by an Indian, then it has to be set in India. For example, Shantaram is written by an Australian, but it's set in India. And I love reading books about the Bombay underworld, and it's a brilliant book. The way because Shantaram is written in first person, so every paragraph has the protagonist in it, and yet it's a 700 or 800-page book. But I didn't put it down. I read it probably in a couple of sittings. So, racist reader, I read Indian books, Indian novels, because I believe when we translate our vernacular into English, we carry the same floweriness into our writing. Take the word love, for instance. There's so many different words for love in Hindi. And that kind of floweriness goes into, it seeps into our writing. So I think a lot of it is endemic as well in the way we brought up.
When Indians were taken as a bonded labor to wherever they were, at what point of time that sort of approach they get away with, like they gave you more freedom or your choices? Was there part of time, or it is just after the independence India got?
So each bonded period was for 5 years, which could be extended for another 5 years. And repeatedly, some people came back to India and came back to South Africa. Some people went to Mauritius, then went back to India, and then they came to South Africa. Strange sort of stories. And simply because they were not re-accepted into rural society in India. Their own families rejected them. But in terms of, they were promised that once your tenure of 5 years finishes, they give you, I think, a couple of pounds and a piece of land. In many cases, it never happened. And even that amount of money they were given as a gratuity was taxed heavily. So Even the Gujaratis had it difficult because they tried to open up shops and they were cheaper than the white shops. But even then, there were so many laws and taxes, municipal taxes that were pushed on their shops. So somehow they made it. I don't know how, but that's the resilience of the Indian.
When and how did this change happen?
You know, as we started to build
We
school,
have a proper freedom struggle to quote when we talk about India. And even though there are the Indians who went to South Africa and South African and intermingled with the South African local community, when is it that the Indians, so to say, got their identity as an independent person away from bondage? When was that period?
right up to 1960s, you were still allowed a free passage back to India if you were Indian. But indentured labor ended in 1917 globally. For South Africa, it ended in 1911. It was slavery. It was just known by a different term. In fact, it was probably worse than slavery because it was written down. You were owned. You were owned. Heart, mind, bodies. Okay, maybe not soul, but you were owned. Sorry, I'm coughing a lot. I don't know why. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a small question, if you can throw some light on that. There used to be a children yoga trust in South Africa. They have published one book from Swami Venkateswarananda. He has spent more than 2 decades there, propagating Indian message, particularly on yoga Vasishtha. The book which has been written, and the commentary which has been given by Vasishtha Rishi to Ram to make him Bhagwan. Are you having any idea that how long this continued?
I haven't heard of it. Which sect is it? Which sect?
This is Swami Venkateswarananda. He has worked more than 2 decades there. That's what says. I have read a lot of books from him. But I had never been to South Africa. But I read a lot of books. It is a really good books which he has published there.
That's surprising. I mean, I know all the major
It's
organizations.
there.
Yeah. No, but you take my card and send me the link because we've got the Divine Life, Hare Krishna,
Yeah.
Sai, but I haven't heard of him. Ramakrishna is very big as well. Hmm. Yeah.
Talked about, performing hour every week, so on. And primarily getting linked to the Arya Smaraj. Is it 1860 onwards as a beard, or you came to India, then you picked up the tradition, or all this transformation?
So it's Arya Samaj came to South Africa around about 1930s. Maybe a little bit earlier. There was a gentleman called Pandit Nardev Vedalankar who was born here. He was a Gujarati Pandit. And I think Vedalankar is a term that's given to someone who's very advanced in the studies of Hinduism. So he brought the Arya Samaj into South Africa. And then there was a protector of Indians who was from India, who was appointed by the British Raj to look after the Indians. So he also visited and he opened up a few buildings under auspices of the Arya Samaj. And what the Arya Samaj did was, like if you look at my father, I showed you a picture of my dada, he's wearing a turban. He understood the rituals, he did the rituals because he came from the villages. But you asked him about the philosophy of what you were doing. Like, why do we do a Hawan? From a scientific point of view, it purifies the atmosphere. He probably didn't know that answer. But the Arya Samaj taught us that. They gave the scientific background, the philosophy behind Hinduism. So they were able to integrate that. And that's where my Nana side came in. They had that kind of educated background where they could speak about philosophy in such a way. I hope that answers your question.
Ask another question. So, if you become the most powerful person in India, what are the things you will change?
I'll make it a vegetarian country. First thing. Emperor Ashoka did that in, I don't know which. He was he was full of, not tamas, rajas at one stage in his life. He was killing. I think he became a big follower of the Buddha. And he turned most of India into a vegetarian. So I would make it vegetarian
What's
first.
the second one?
Second one, that's the thing. Modi is doing everything. Yogi Adityanath is doing everything. Acharya is doing everything that I love. I mean, I wish we could have those gentlemen there, but we don't. But they're doing what I want already. I don't need to do it. It's being done. Your infrastructure is being developed at such a pace. I mean, what UP was and what UP is. Before you tell people you're from UP in India, you feel a bit embarrassed in Bombay. But now there's a lot of respect, you know. But you guys should be glad you're living in the era of Modi and so forth.
One thing I find very interesting also, I think that if you were a British citizen
Uh,
or as a country, they talk a lot about human rights and other things. So how they could be so cruel 200 years ago? That's difficult to understand because I do meet some of the British friends. Doesn't seem like they seem very gentle women and all those things. So how they were so bad?
that's the dichotomy. And the worst part is they criticize India about its minority rights. And when I tell people, if you look at the RSS has a Muslim wing, but they refuse to accept it. They think I'm making. I said, go and Google. You got the research right there in your hands. So the British are the first people to criticize India and minority rights, but India recognizes minority rights. Like they say, the Muslims are allowed to go on Hajj, and it's somewhat subsidized by the Indian government, but Hindus are not. And no offense to them, I've got lots of Muslim friends. I have lots of Muslims who I love dearly, but it's a misnomer. A lot of it is based on rumors or people who are just anarchists. And the problem with anarchists, they have the biggest mouths. And what spreads, does good news or bad news spread faster? It's bad news. So that's how people talk. They don't base it on facts, they base it on rumors.
Just to butt in, I think, not just 200 years ago, even today, the white race, and I don't mean to be sounding racist, but they are still true when it comes to somebody else's rights. It's about imposing and, trying to impose your viewpoint because you always feel that you are the privileged one who can set the rules and define what is humane and what is not. Otherwise, I think as a country and a culture, we've always been very aware of our, people and animals and everything around, every living being.
It's a,
Recently, that it was only 200 years.
it's still there. Like South Africa, the white people are descendants of Dutch and English. Durban is a very English city. I showed you that picture of myself celebrating Diwali with the fireworks. They don't accept that, why are we bursting fireworks? And then they try to teach me that fireworks were invented in China. So how is it a Hindu tradition? So I told them, what is culture? If it's celebrated for more than one or two generations in your family, it becomes part of your culture. You understand what I mean? And then I tell them, you have an issue about the dogs being disturbed when we light fireworks because the ears are more sensitive. How about the fact that you are eating, okay, you're not eating dogs, but you're eating, something that is a sentient being. How do you explain that? And they normally don't have answers. They just don't have answers. And but yes, do they look at you with disdain? I think some of the English still do it. In 2023, you still see it's disappearing. The new generation. Maybe I went to an all Indian school right up to 1991 was when I matriculated. There were only Indians in my school, but my nieces they mix. They got white friends, African friends. Colored means mixed race. It is changing, but very slowly. My generation still has that. Maybe I have racism within me as well. I probably do.
What do you think we can do to connect with the diaspora, not diaspora, like second, third generation, fourth generation Indians like you, to have better connection between India and you?
There are systems out there, there are organizations. If you want me to link up, I've given you my card, I will link you up. Second thing is get the word out there. We may be saying in Africa, but we're not running around in loincloths. We're not hunting lions. We're very modern cities, and it's comparable. Durban is comparable to Dubai 20 years ago, like I said. Fantastic infrastructure. It is starting to fail because the guys in government don't have the capacity. But it happens post.
Like what we need to do to get the word out that the younger generation should be coming to India, getting like look what you did, like can we make it more systematic?
We can. The one thing I found is the high consulates and the ambassadors in South Africa from India, I think it's more ceremonial. I don't think that much effort is being put into taking us back to our roots. Like I know my great grandfather and so forth left behind brothers and sisters. So I still want to go and meet them. It's just that I took one day to go to each village. But I will meet them because I want to meet my bloodline. Uh, it's going out there and talking. Like I said, maybe some of you are sitting here, if I talk about South Africa, you'll think cricket, that's it. And that's a fact. We have very good cricketers. But in terms of what it is, it's not like the rest of Africa. It's a very developed nation. So you just have to go out there and talk about it and link up with people like me. And there are organizations. Gopio is people of Indian origin. I'm an OCI, Overseas Citizen of India. I made sure I got that. You just have to link up with the right people, and maybe I'm one of those right people, and spread the word. Not only USA and UK, and we still imagine 170 years. I mean, I'm still doing Pitarpak prayers. Think about it. I mean, you wouldn't have thought that, would you? I mean, can you imagine someone in the US doing Pitarpak prayers, third generation? I'm fourth. I've got sixth generation people doing it. Anything else? Okay. Thank you for your time, and I hope it was interesting. And I've got books here. I've asked them to keep one for the vice chancellor and one for the librarian. And you guys, I'm not selling books. I'm not here to make money out of books. You're welcome to take it, and I'll sign it. Thank you for your time.